Today we're photographing a wedding entirely after dark, which is by far the most stressful and challenging genre of wedding photography. This was originally going to be part of my off-camera flash for wedding photographers course that is now out on Patreon, but as you'll see, we don't end up using a lot of off-camera flash today. If you're interested in seeing how I approach a full wedding day with off-camera flash, head over to Patreon and sign up for the month to get that content.
Taylor Jackson,
shooting 67 weddings last year.
Taylor Jackson, welcome.
So Taylor, you are well known in this community. You're an amazing photographer.
Welcome to my last wedding of the year. It is also by far the most challenging. So today, the fun things we get to deal with is the fact that the wedding itself begins after dark. Right now is beautiful golden hour, but I don't start for another half hour. So by the time that I begin, everything's gonna be dark. We're gonna do everything inside, and I'm gonna do some off-camera flash, some on-camera flash, as well as some ambient, depending on what room they're in. I'm not entirely sure yet, so we'll figure that out together. But this is the hardest case wedding. I haven't shot one of these in, I'm gonna say, 10 plus years. The last one that I remember, I did kind of in a basement with a 35 and 85 on my Nikon D700, and that would have been like 2007, 2008. So let's get to it. All right, so walking in here, clearly it is quite a warm environment. Heater's going. After actually being in the ceremony space, I don't think I'm actually going to use off-camera flash in there. I think the way it's going to come together with the lighting in there and the heaters is that the heaters are actually going to be the main light and the overheads are going to be a little bit of a fill. I will have the off-camera set up in case I need it, but I think that'll almost make it non-balanced, and ambient is a better choice in this case. All right, new plan. I'm going to shoot ambient, but I'm going to have my flash actually on my camera because I fear when everybody stands up, they're going to block out all of the side lights and all my main light. So I'd like to be able to quickly troubleshoot that if that does end up being the case. So let's get to it. This would be a perfect time to be outside doing photos. I learned how to white balance for fire. All right, switching to voiceover because it's weird to talk when there's other people around and you're working at a wedding. This is one of the times that having good camera gear is really going to make your job, one, easier, and two, even possible. Look at how dark it is. Like if I wasn't able to shoot at 5000 ISO at 1.6 or 1.4, this really would have been a challenging environment to set up with. I know that I could set up off-camera lights and I could light this space up, but with how dark it is, that would be the most annoying thing ever for all the guests, especially with how many frames I shoot. If you're a follower of the channel, you know that I tend to take a lot of pictures, and by doing that and taking like 20 frames of somebody coming down the aisle, especially because you're kind of hedging for focus that, well, a lot of the frames are going to be good, that not everything's going to be perfect in this low of light. And that kind of goes for any camera, that there's no magic camera that's just going to put all of this in focus, that it's going to be a challenge with every system. I'm using the Nikon D850 with the 85mm 1.4G, and I find it to be pretty good. The autofocus is quite honestly like kind of slow, but it seems accurate enough, and I'm single point AFC, so I have my autofocus point on whoever's face I'm trying to focus on, and I'm just tracking them down while they come down the aisle, and it seems to be working out pretty well. Everybody's just kind of a warm-up for when the bride, and in this case her brother, come down the aisle. I'm just kind of figuring out what is working the best, what lighting is working the best, and right now when they kind of pass through the two heaters down at the end of the aisle there, fire is literally my main light down there. It's a lot better. You can't really see it on the video, but it's more intense and I think a better light overall than the overheads that are kind of coming down. I actually took my on-camera flash off because I realized that I didn't really need it, and then after some brief testing in the lighting conditions like this, I realized that if I went to 5000 ISO and 1.4, 1.6, I was pretty happy with that result, and that would have been better and much less annoying for everybody than me popping my flash every like half a second for the entire length of the processional and a bunch of the ceremony as well. So protecting the guest experience, you don't really want to be the photographer that is like the main center of attention. And I felt that if I had two off-camera lights set up, because if I was to set up one off-camera light, it would be very unbalanced. If I had two off-camera lights on each side kind of the aisle, that would be kind of the most annoying. And they just hired myself as a single photographer, so they don't want a production. They didn't hire a film crew. They didn't hire a second photographer. So I kind of err on the side of being a little less obtrusive, a little more fly on the wall. And I kind of feel like, I guess, another benefit of being at night, or maybe the main benefit for me, is that usually I don't get that close during a wedding ceremony, but I feel like in the cover of nighttime, like I'm Batman or whatever, that it seems like it's easier to get closer. I don't have such hesitation being introverted and shy to get a little bit closer when it is a situation like this. Also, my white balances, you'll notice I'm pretty much white balancing. This situation here is okay because the lights don't seem to be changing and flickering too much, but the reception space we'll get to in a few minutes here is one that the lights basically, even if you're at 100th of a second, that the lights are kind of turning off and on, and your white balance does literally change every single frame. So I'm actually going to do a second video about this with some, I guess, more proper tips that'll be coming out in the future. But basically, my stress with weddings like this is, one, I actually turn a lot of them away because it's a very stressful, it pretty much like as a capstone to my entire year, like that this is the last wedding of my entire year. I knew going in that this was the wedding that I was kind of the most worried about overall. And to live an entire wedding season like that, knowing that you have something coming up that's incredibly going to be challenging and that you can't really properly exactly prepare for it, is kind of just stressful for my life. So I usually say no. Tara and Sean and I, we seem to get along really well. And the other thing that they were looking for was a lot more candid coverage than anything else. And I am okay with that. And I feel that when couples come to me and they're expecting to see what they see on my website, and they know that they're getting married after dark, that a lot of people aren't really super aware of that. They were super aware of the fact that like they knew what they were doing. So I really do manage expectations when I'm getting into a situation that I know that I'm a little bit uncomfortable with. I know that like the mindset is to go to your comfort zone and do things that you're not comfortable with and figure it out. But I really do want to make sure that I do a good job and that I can possibly do a good job, because there have been some wedding situations that I've been like, hey, we'd love to hire you. And I just know that there's no way that I can deliver great work. So I actually pass them off to somebody else, and hopefully that somebody else does a good job. But it was just not a liability and a risk that I wanted to take on my business going into wedding day, knowing that I really couldn't do the proper quality of work that I could on a normal wedding day. This situation specifically, I knew I've been out to all these spaces before, so I knew what I was getting myself into. I know that I have the proper gear that I can set up those 2 off-camera lights if I choose to, or if I absolutely need to. So going into this day, I knew that I had the tools, I knew the space, and I knew that they weren't really expecting like an hour-long photo shoot with the 2 of them, because it's quite honestly like very challenging to do after dark photos with a couple. And if they're expecting like 150 great images of themselves for Instagram, it's going to be very challenging. But if they're expecting documentary style coverage with a small photo session, that aligns much more with what's possible within this space and at this time. For the first kiss, I'm pre-focused on them, which means that I've locked my point. I don't use back button focus. I do the opposite, where my back button focus is actually autofocus lock. So I half press to find my spot, and then I lock it with my back finger. So I'm holding on that and just waiting for it to happen. I don't want my autofocus to play any funny tricks on me. So I'm spending a little bit more time and energy to maybe work a little bit slower and to make sure that all of the important moments that I'm actually going to capture. On a typical wedding day, I can be a little bit more frantic. I can know that my camera is going to keep up with me, but in a situation like this, I really do kind of have to work a little bit slower than I usually would. You'll see this in the session, the actual couple session that is like 3 minutes total. But as they're walking down towards me on the aisle, I'm actually kind of taking a few small steps back with them. And that's basically just to make sure that my autofocus, it makes it a little bit easier on it, I think, if I'm kind of pacing with them and not relying completely on my autofocus continuous to track back with them. So if I move back with them, I know that like worst case, they're going to be still pretty much as sharp as the last frame. And fortunately they didn't run too fast. She did, but the couple didn't go too fast. And then as they're leaving, this is a great shot too. This is why it's important to have 2 cameras set up, that you're able to get that frame that I would have missed otherwise. All right, so for the formal section of this, as you can see reflected in the glass behind them, you're already kind of seeing a lot of the chandelier and everything. Ideally, I would like to not have any real reflections in the glass, but after a few test frames, I realized that it's actually kind of adding a little bit of depth to the image that wouldn't otherwise exist. They'd kind of be just floating in black space, which is not the most ideal photo. So I kind of like the reflections in this case, and I just have to be conscious to hide myself so that I'm not just like standing beside them in all of their wedding photos in the reflections. So that's something to be super conscious about when you're photographing into glass at night, which is again, kind of like the worst case situation, but there's really no other great option. This is a warm option because it's very cold out right now, and it is an option that there's just not a lot of people around. I've stopped down a little bit, but I'm staying at 5000 ISO, so I'm kind of using my flash to mitigate that gap, to add a little bit of more light to the scene and to be able to stay at 5000 ISO. I could go to 6400, but I feel like after 6400, I'm kind of getting into space that I haven't really processed files in this style. So now I know that 5000 is totally fine. 6400 would be totally fine. So I can, next time in the future, press a little bit higher, but I don't really like to experiment and just kind of shoot blindly before I've actually tested something properly. And honestly, going into this day, I didn't expect to have to be shooting at 5000 ISO. I really want to be running the on-camera audio here, but there's unfortunately there's some music playing and I don't own the copyright to it. And if I post it on YouTube, YouTube will be upset at me for it. So you get to listen to my voice, unfortunately, for a little while longer. I'm basically running the exact same photo session that you've seen me run in many other wedding days, that I get them to smile, face the camera for that boring photo. I get them to get nice and close together, forget that I'm there, and then I get them to hold hands and just walk towards me. And again, you can see that I'm pacing back with them to make it a little bit easier on my autofocus, whereas usually if I was outside, I would just be letting the autofocus do all the work. All right, moving inside here, I'm back to just shooting ambient. That it's good enough. The lights, even at 1/100th of a second shutter, they're flickering. Basically what happens is that if you have LED bulbs, or I guess fluorescent bulbs, really any bulbs, I've noticed this with, it's been a while since I've just discovered light bulbs that are just fine. Everything has a little bit of flicker to it. If it's on a dimmer, if it's in a wedding venue, I don't know what the technical reason is, but they turn off and on and off and on, as you can see in this example here. And that light that's coming down from the top isn't actually the DJ light. That's just the way that the lights in the venue are, and that will affect any camera and make your day very stressful, unfortunately. The way to get over it is to shoot a lower shutter speed than the refresh of the lights, which for video, if you're shooting like 1/30th of a second, you can get away with, but when you're actually photographing moving people, there's not a whole lot that you can do, unfortunately. Then the other negative is that it also affects every single image differently as far as white balance goes in post-production. So every single image is slightly different, so you can't just do a batch correct over everything, which kind of goes back to why, I guess, in a wedding like this takes me way longer to edit than a traditional wedding that is just kind of all outside in the same consistent light. The workaround is simply to like take bursts of 3 images at a time and take the best one that is the most lit. So as you can see, I put my CTO gel on my flash and we're doing the family formals kind of out here in the front of the room. Again, not the most ideal situation, but because of venue constraints, there's a charity event going on upstairs, so we can't use anything outside of this room. So we're going around, we're also doing table shots too. So we're doing family shots and then less formal, just kind of table shots of everybody that came. This is not something that I would normally do, but today it was a request, and because of my just general lack of ability to get candids because the day is so tight, that I'm happy to do that. As you can see, I've set my off-camera flash up. It is at 1/64 power, bouncing straight on the ceiling, right beside the podium there. It was kind of the best spot. As you can see off to the left of the podium, that ceiling is super high and it's all mirrors, which means that the light that goes up there is going to reflect kind of like a disco ball, and it's just going to be complete madness. So I have to kind of stay over here or against the wall. I eventually flip my flash to point straight at that wall for their first dances. That's kind of a better, I guess, light that I feel like it hides a little bit better once all the lights come down. And because the DJ light has been set up here as well, that it kind of almost makes sense that the light comes from the same direction. So I've kind of hid my light, my good light, in with the multicolored DJ light, basically just so that I don't have another like crazy strobe going off that's very distracting from what the couple's actually doing. But hiding over there, I think it's totally acceptable. You can see it bouncing off on the side of the screen there. Well, that light is creating good consistent light that just has them lit pretty much as well as I could with a single light. I've kind of done a quick little circle around, and I found that this is kind of the best spot for everything coming together. It's not the spot that I necessarily would have expected, and I'm kind of hanging out with the cake, but it's important to get the safe shots first and then go for a little circle and make sure that you're getting the best possible frames. Now we're doing some more table shots now in the dark time, which is a little bit more challenging, but fortunately I have a white roof right above me here. So I'm just able to point my flash. I point it back kind of on like maybe a 30 degree, 45 degree angle to make sure that the light isn't coming down directly from above, because it looks a little bit crazy and gives people some kind of bags and dark circles under their eyes if you do that. That's all for today. I hope that you got something from this, because it was stressful, it was hard, it was not easy, and hopefully this helped in some way. I'll be back eventually with a detailed, I guess a more detailed video about kind of how I specifically prepare in regards to gear for a wedding day like this, as well as kind of some editing, because white balance is a bit of a tricky thing. If you are a Patreon member, you have access now to my off-camera flash course. The last 2 modules, one is coming out tomorrow, and then the next one is coming out the following Monday. And if you're a Patreon member, you have access to that, so you can learn all about my off-camera flash strategy and bouncing, because I don't bring any modifiers whenever I go out into the world of a wedding day, because they're annoying and distracting. Thanks for watching, and I will see you again next time.